Good morning, dear Sangha. Today is the 16th of June, the year 2022, and we are in the last day of our June retreat. Can you believe it's already the last day? Yeah. It went by really fast with many special events. Please excuse me, I have a cough drop in my mouth. And also, please excuse me, should I start coughing anytime during the talk? I tested negative this morning, so rest assured. So this retreat, we have been learning about the 4 Dharma seals of Plum Village, and a lot more. And I just want to recap a little bit about what Thầy Pháp Ấn shared yesterday. So yesterday, our dear brother shared about the interbeing of the 3 times, past, present, and future, and also the interbeing of the true truths, the relative and the absolute, as well as the 4 noble truths. And so I just want to recap a little bit about that. The Buddhist notion of time, we can't really represent it as a straight line. And I think many of us, we grew up with time being represented as a straight line. And even when we look at the biography of someone's life, you see it in a timeline, either horizontal or vertical, but it's always in a line. But the Buddhist notion of time is much better represented as a circle. And Thầy Pháp Ấn has shown this yesterday when he drew future, past, and present. And today I want to share another circle that one time Thầy had shared with us. Also Buddhist notion, representing the Buddhist notion of time. And this is just an example. So imagine a slideshow. And this is the slide that is being shown, projected, right? And you know, on a slideshow, you have many slides. And it's rotating. So this is the slide, and you can call this the slide of the present moment. And as soon as this slide passes, here's the future slide coming towards you. So yesterday when Thầy Pháp Ấn said, the future is coming towards you, it's kind of like that. So the future is approaching us. So the next slide gets projected here. And then this slide becomes the past, right? Look. When, at one point, it will cycle around again. The past slides, it will cycle around again to become the present. So the past becoming the future to become the present. I'm going to take a few moments so you can kind of absorb this, because you have to release your kind of Cartesian thinking in order to absorb the Buddhist concept of time. But you see, these slides, they are not So this example is not really too good because the slides, you'll see them as permanent and unchanging and cycling out. But in reality, these slides are constantly changing, constantly growing, constantly maturing, constantly what we call ripening. And so today, that's what we'll talk about. The fourth Dharma door of Plum Village. The fourth Dharma seal of Plum Village, which is, and before I get into it, I find it kind of strange. We almost always cover the first Dharma door, Dharma seal, which is, I have arrived, I am home. And the second one you hear very often, going as a river, going as a river, going as a sangha. And the third one, the interbeing of the three times, you also hear very often. But maybe you haven't heard very often about ripening or maturation. So the fourth Plum Village Dharma seal is called ripening. Ripening at every moment. In the Sino-Vietnamese, it's Sak Na Yi Thup. My Chinese is not really good. I'm just writing it in Chinese for the benefit of our Chinese friends or Chinese-speaking friends, and also for the benefit of my ancestors, because we also used the Chinese script for many, many hundreds and hundreds of years before we were able to use the Romanization of the Vietnamese language as you see today. So Sak Na Yi Thup means ripening at every moment. Sak Na is moment, you can say the smallest unit of time. And Yi Thup means ripening or maturation. Or Yi Thup is also another name, is Vipaka, it's also Vipaka. It's another name for store consciousness. So store consciousness has many different names. Vipaka is one of them. Store consciousness has the capacity to store all the seeds and to keep them and to help them to continue to mature, to continue to ripen. It's just like if you look at the earth, I don't know where that bell is coming from. But it's quite lovely to have a moment to just stop and not talk. So store consciousness has the capacity to store everything, and it ensures the ripening. It keeps the seeds and to help them to ripen. And if you look at the earth, it's you can see this. You can see this. Any seed that you put in the earth, you don't know how the earth retains the seeds. You don't know how it stores it. And you don't even know how it helps to mature the seeds, whether it's a tree or grass or a flower. Actually, our science, earth science, soil science, is at its very early stages, I think. And we don't really know how the earth can keep and to nurture and nourish and and bring to being manifestation so many of the plants that we see, although we have the impression that we do. So it's the same with stored consciousness. And sometimes there are seeds that are buried really deep inside, and they're what we call dormant. And still, stored consciousness has the capacity to keep those seeds alive. About 2 years ago, we made the parking lot that you saw in Lower Hamlet. You go in and before that, that house on that side is owned by an English couple. And they love their lawns perfectly green and weed-free. So when the couple came in and they built this house and they made this lawn, it's beautiful grass, always cut short and weed-free, basically. And then when the sisters bought it over and took over that property, not take over, kind of, moved over to that property. So then we had, in the beginning, the grass was pretty nice, and then year one, end of year one, you started seeing lots of weeds, different kinds of weeds that we'd never seen before on this perfectly mowed green lawn. And the weeds got more prolific, as time went by, because we don't use herbicides or weed, whatever, killers and things like that. It was like a natural process. And so we started seeing weeds, and it's like, wow, where did these weeds come from when this grass was perfectly green? And for many years, there was no weeds in the earth. How did the earth, the soil, keep those weeds? And of course, there were probably weeds flying in from everywhere as well. But that was one. And then when we did the parking lot and the soil was excavated, we had to remove a lot of that soil, and that's why you see all the mounds and things like that all over Lower Hamlet. And after we did the parking lot, and then come the first spring after the whole project, the earth, the mounds of earth that we had moved all over, suddenly mustard seeds were everywhere. Like we had these mounds and mounds of mustard seeds, and it was really beautiful. And I just looked at it in amazement, because it'd been 10 years since I saw any signs of mustard seeds on that perfectly green lawn. And yet when the soil was excavated and exposed to the sun, and no grass, because when you dig up soil, it's like... And then mustard seeds started appearing. It was so beautiful. And I thought, how did the earth keep the mustard seeds for so long? Because you think after many rains and after many seasons, the mustard seeds must rot and not be there anymore. And yet, the earth was able to preserve it for a very, very long time. So unlike what we think, right? I don't know. If you're a soil scientist, please come talk to me after, because I would really love to understand these things more. But anyhow, this to say that stored consciousness has the capacity to keep all the seeds. And when we speak about seeds, we're talking about action. Everything that's stored in our consciousness, all the seeds, we understand them as, we can see them as action as well. So actions, or here's a big word, karma. But very often we use it in the wrong way. Oh, you just have bad karma. Oh, don't get me near that person, she's bad karma. Something like that. So no, it's not like that. So in Buddhism, karma just simply means action. Action of body, speech, and thinking. So thinking, speech, and actions. The big action includes all three. Yeah. Here are all right actions here. What we do. Everything that we do, all of our actions of thinking, speech, and doing, stored consciousness has the capacity to retain and keep them and store them, and then to help them to mature, to ripen. And it retains everything. Nothing is lost. Nothing is lost. Nothing is lost, only transformed or matured, ripened. And when we speak about ripening at every moment, the fourth Dharma seal, there are a few different kinds of ripening. One is so ripening at different times. So yi thơi nhi thục means ripening at different times. It means yi thơi is different times. So ripening at different times. For instance, if you smile at me, some actions, they have an effect right away. They ripen right away. And some actions take much longer to ripen. Like if you smile at me or at someone, sometimes they could return your smile right away. Or sometimes that smile can take a few days to ripen, which is often my case. It doesn't. So if you see me with a neutral face after you've smiled at me, don't just stop smiling at me. Have faith that that smile will ripen in 2 or 3 days. Sometimes shorter, but it will ripen in me somehow. So ripening at different times. I remember also in Tay's Dharma Talks, you know how in every Dharma Talk he speaks about mindful breathing and mindful walking and how we can embrace our strong emotions with mindful breathing and mindful walking. And I remember one time when my brother, he came to visit me, and it was his first time listening to a Dharma talk by Tay. And afterwards, I asked him, so what did you think about the talk? And my brother, he, with his beginner's mind, he just said, all he talked about was mindful breathing and mindful walking. What's that all about? So the seeds of mindfulness had not ripened in him yet. He hadn't experienced a moment where maybe a strong emotion came up and he really needed to take refuge in his mindful breathing or his mindful walking to calm it down. So it wasn't something so important to him. It just sounded like breathing, walking. You know, there's so many complicated things to talk about out there. Why do you speak about something as simple as breathing and walking, and he's a Zen master? Something like that. So sometimes you hear the Dharma and it ripens right away. And sometimes you hear a teaching and it takes years and years to ripen. I remember ever since I was a novice, Tay had already spoken about, he gave many different examples. One time he was like, Tay is just like a pot of tea leaves. You know, the first pouring, the second pouring, the third pouring is still fragrant. But by the 50th pouring, there's hardly anything, and now there's hardly anything left of this tea. Any flavor, any fragrance left of this tea. And I thought, hey, how can you say that of yourself? But he was very nonchalant about it when he gave the example. And then I remember too, one time in one of the Dharma talks, he brought his passport that he just renewed. And he held up the passport, and I think he was in his late 70s, early 80s maybe. And he held up his passport, and he said, this is Tay's last passport. The last passport that Tay has to renew. And at that time, I was like, how can you say that? You never know. And or like he would sometimes, you know, when we're having tea with him, or even in a Dharma talk, he would say, oh, the work that you have to do is immense. And he would say things like, you are a part of history. And I didn't get it. And I was just, why? I'm just a tiny me, and I see Plum Village is just this tiny place. Like, how can you say we're a part of history? Things like that. Or all the times that he was sharing with us, a cloud never dies. All of the times that he taught about no birth and no death. There's no birth and no death. There's only continuation. It went in one ear and out the other. You know, something like that. I think until my father passed away and I was able to go home and be with my family, that everything that he'd ever taught about no birth and no death kind of ripened in me and gave me enough understanding and wisdom to be with my grieving family and to also be able to hold my own grief and to hold my family's grief. And I knew that, like looking back, I know that that takes maturation, that takes that insight of no birth and no death takes time to ripen. And so when Tay himself passed away, transitioned earlier this year, the whole Sangha was quite prepared. He had been preparing us for many, many years. And at that time of his passing, there was sadness, there was grieving, etc. But as well, the insight of no birth and no death was so alive that not just in our Sangha, but everyone who came and posted comments on all the videos that we posted, or all of the posts on social media that we did. All the comments were very accepting of, oh, a cloud never dies. They clearly saw that Tay never died. So like that insight, after all those years of transmission, had ripened into a real kind of understanding. And so when Tay passed away, we had that insight very much alive. Except for some journalists, they said, I guess because they hadn't been watering insights all these years. So some articles I remember saying, yes, Ten Yung Han has passed, and he doesn't believe in death, He says there's no such thing as death, full stop. And then I thought, but there's the other line that he always said, but they never took it in. And the other line is, there's no death, there's only continuation. So we're like, how can we help the journalists add in this one line? Because that's a seed that you would, that's a kind of action, that's a kind of thought that you are putting out into the world. Oh, there's no such thing as death. But it's not a complete thought. There's no such thing as death. There's only continuation, right? And maybe someday when someone deals with a death of their family, they might refer to that line. Oh, there's no such thing as death. But then they missed the other part of the insight, which is there's only continuation. So that seed is planted and it will ripen in its own way. But if the seed of there's no such thing as death, there's only continuation, is transmitted, it gets ripened in its own way as well. Yeah. So ripening at different times. The second kind of ripening is, if I was tall enough, then I would have enough space to write. Unfortunately, okay. The second type of ripening is ripening of different kinds of actions. So there are many different kinds of seeds, and they all mature in their own time. Tay often gives an example of a mango. When it's ripened, it becomes a mango. An orange, when it ripens, it's an orange. So fear, when it ripens, we'll get to that in a moment. Anger, when it ripens. Ripening of different kinds of actions. Mm-hmm. Yi loi, ni thup. Ripening of different kinds of actions. So in every moment we produce a multitude of actions, of thinking, of speech, of actions. And they're all ripening, all ripening. And when they ripen, when they ripen into the kind of actions that the seeds are. The seed of actions will ripen into the kinds of seed of anger will ripen into the kinds of actions that have the flavor of anger. Yeah, the seeds of compassion, when they ripen, will have the flavor of compassion and love. The third kind of ripening is ripening into different forms. Oh, yeah. So, ripening of different forms. Biến dị, nhị thục. And the example that Tay often gives is an orange blossom, or the tiny orange green fruit. When it ripens, it's not green. Well, you do have some green oranges, but a lot of oranges, when they ripen, they become orange. The color changes. So then we have to be able to recognize. We have to be able to recognize the different forms in which they have ripened. When I was at home this when I visited my mother in Florida this last January, I went into the supermarket, big supermarket in Florida, and then at the end of some of the frozen food aisles, there was a huge freezer, and inside that freezer was Impossible Burger, Impossible Vegan Burger, and Impossible. They had these sausages. Basically, they were vegan burgers, and I was so surprised because the last home visit I made, I was trying to look for a vegan restaurant in South Florida, and the closest one was like 40 miles away or something like that. I was like, oh wow, there's no vegan restaurants anywhere anywhere in Florida. I don't know. If you're from Florida, please tell me if there are any. California, I know there's a lot, but somehow the consciousness in Florida, veganism is not so big. But then when I went into this supermarket and I saw this there, although it's, they don't have a full vegan restaurant yet, but hey, there's this whole freezer, not just one small section, it was like a whole freezer of vegan products. Impossible Burger, Impossible sausage, or whatever. And I was like, wow. So I just want to tell this story to thank all of you activists out there who for many years have voiced about veganism or about climate and things like that. And I just want to say that your actions have ripened. And into this freezer at the end of a supermarket in Florida where there are no vegan restaurants around. So ripening in different forms. Sometimes you think, oh, I'm just signing a protest or I'm just speaking out about something. when that ripens, when that action ripens, it can take on many, many different forms, and we have to be able to recognize the different forms that it has ripened into. Also, I'm not sure if I should touch this, but there's a question about how can mindfulness help with mindfulness and self-compassion help with discrimination earlier in the retreat. And I think, first of all, it is crucial that we can identify the suffering that discrimination brings about. And also, not just identify the kind of suffering that's happening in us or in our relationships that discrimination brings about, but also to be able to recognize all of the different forms of discrimination's ripening. Because when we look at the present moment is a maturation of all of our past actions. I want to repeat that. So the present moment is a maturation, a ripening of all of our past actions. All of our actions. And so when we look at, let's say, the schools we've attended or the neighborhoods that we live in, the kinds of rights we have or the kinds of privileges that we are enjoying, the kinds of societies that have been set up. Where has discrimination played its part in that? How has discrimination ripened into the kinds of societies that we are living in right now? How has discrimination ripened into the kinds of neighborhoods, the kinds of systems that we are currently in right now? And we have to be able to name, we have to be able to recognize the many, many different forms of its ripening. It's not just an attitude. Because when actions ripen, they have a retribution. And the retribution is always both. There's a main, which is body. You can see this retribution in your body. And you can also recognize this retribution in our environment. So there's main retribution and environment retribution. So when the seeds ripen, we can recognize it, how it is manifesting in our body, in our thinking, in our speech, but we can also recognize how it's ripened in our environment, in our systems. And I think in America, for instance, talks about reparation. It would be much easier if you had this kind of understanding. The ripening of seeds in different forms. Ripening of actions at different times, different kinds of actions ripening and ripening in different forms. We have to be able to recognize how racism has ripened in its many different forms. even in our own consciousness. Not just racism, but even something like colonialism. You know, in Plum Village, we would think that we're all very good practitioners. There's, nothing bad going on here. But actually, we are also dealing with all these things. We're also, I'll give you an example. One time I was in a meeting, and one of my Francophone sisters said something about, we have, Plum Village is obligated, we have to do this for France, and we're in France, and we owe this debt of gratitude to the French people and also the land of France. And I share this, I don't want to offend any of our Francophone friends who are here. It's an example of ripening, okay? And when I heard that, I was so angry. And I didn't know why I was so angry. I had to close my eyes and I had to breathe with that when I heard that line, that statement. And I didn't know where this anger was coming from, because I felt like I have a good relationship with my sister, and also in any other given situation or circumstance, I would think, of course it makes sense. When you're somewhere, you have to be able to kind of be appropriate, share the things that are appropriate to that place, and to support the things that are locally wherever you are. And it makes absolute sense to do that, to be able to go and offer things on this land and in France. But for some reason, that day I was so angry, and I had no idea where this anger was coming from. And then I took some time to, after the meeting, I did walking meditation out to the car. And as I was, just coming back to my steps and just really breathing and coming back, embracing the anger that was there in me. And suddenly I had the insight that this anger is not my own, but it's actually my ancestors, and it was dormant, just like the mustard seeds. It had been lying dormant there for so long. And as soon as I saw, oh, this is anger coming from my ancestors, and I just embraced it like that. Because, you see, the Indochina War had happened way before my time. My grandparents never talk about, I didn't grow up with my grandparents, so I didn't hear anything about it. And also, my whole family emigrated to America. So the war between French and Vietnam, it happened so long ago, and I was so removed from it. And I grew up in, the American education system, and they don't teach you hardly anything about the French Indochina War, so I had no idea, what happened there anyways. And yet, all of this anger was there, and at the base. And then I thought, wow, all of these years, there's nothing that I read, nothing that I was in contact in, whether with my parents or grandparents, or even my friends, had watered any kinds of seeds of anger against French people. And yet, sitting there in this meeting, I had this huge reaction. You see, the seed was there, and it was dormant. And at that time, it had ripened. And had I not been mindful, I would have lashed out and said something really unkind and escalated and probably get to some kind of conflict again. But I was very grateful at the time that I was able to come back to my breathing and really sit with the anger that was there. Not blaming, not judging, just really holding the anger. And also at the same time, I felt the pain of my ancestors. And this is not, it wasn't to blame. It was just there. It was just something that was there that I needed to take care of. And also that moment, I'd recognize the seeds are there. And it was a ripening. It was a ripening, that anger. So to be able to recognize how the seeds ripen, when they ripen, when we come back to the present moment and we're mindful of what is going on in the present moment, we can recognize the maturation, what has been watered and how it's ripening. So to be able to recognize the present moment as a maturation of all of our actions. And when I say all of my actions, it's not just in my lifetime, like I keep saying, it's also our ancestors. Because we have a tendency to think that we're just in this body when we think that, we're this body and here I am. Oh, I'm not a good artist, so there. Here I am. And then here are my parents, etc., going back. And I think I'm here, and so this is my ancestry, etc. And they seem outside of me, right? And it seems like I've inherited this body from my ancestors, etc. So what is contained in here is like an inheritance or whatever. But I inherited this body from my ancestors, but I also inherited much, much more. Everything that they ever did, all of their actions of thinking, speech, and bodily actions have gone out into the world and have continued to mature, have continued to ripen, and I continue to receive those actions again, not just in this body, but also in my environment. Yeah. And I think we have to, so in our training, we are training ourselves to get used to looking at us, not just in this body, but also in our actions that always continue out there. What you say, what you do, continues to ripen, not just in your own stored consciousness, but in the stored consciousness of those you touch, of everyone around you. We've also inherited, so the present moment being a manifestation, a ripening, a maturation of all actions, we've inherited the collective maturation as well as the individual maturation. Yeah. You can listen to one sound of the bell. So in the classical teachings, there's only 3 kinds of ripening, and we can end here. But Tay added a 4th one, and I wonder if you can guess what it is. So ripening at different times. Oh no, not time, space. Ripening at different spaces. At or in? Okay, fine. Ripening in different spaces. So, yi su, ni tuk. And Tay gives an example of a cloud. When it becomes, it could be in the sky. And then when it becomes the rain or the snow, it's everywhere. Everywhere, a little bit everywhere on the earth. So ripening in different places, you might produce an action here, but you never know how it ripens in another location, because it's always continuing to ripen. And we can see this very clearly in the light of our climate crisis, climate emergency situation right now, that actions that are actions that began in one place ripens differently in another place. You can see that clearly with the global north, the global south. You can see that very clearly with the islands that are being threatened to be underwater. It's not like the people in that island did all these actions to drown their own island, you know. But actions of thinking, speech, and actions, and thinking and speech started in one place can mature in another place, can mature in many different places. So when we look at the present moment in terms of maturation, in terms of maturation of all the seeds, ripening of all the seeds, and we look deeply into the present moment and we can recognize the ripening. At the same time, we have a huge power to be able to identify the kinds of actions needed to ensure a good retribution, to ensure that when this action ripens, it will ripen into a wonderful future. Yeah? And remember, the future is coming towards you. All of these slides, they will mature. They mature, they continue to change, continue to mature, continue to take on different forms. So it's a living thing. It's a living thing. All these actions are living seeds in our consciousness, not just in our individual consciousness, but in the collective consciousness. So it's very important when we practice mindfulness, concentration, and insight to recognize the situation as it is, to look deeply and to identify the kinds of actions that are needed. We have a group of Vietnamese business people here, and I was quite inspired when speaking to them, especially about how they're able to bring mindfulness into their companies. And one person said something very interesting. She's like, "Oh, mindfulness, we're not just applying it to have like a relief, but we apply it into our companies to recognize the pain points." So they recognize the pain points and the kinds of actions needed to remove the pain points. So with understanding this ripening, this fourth Plum Village Dharma seal, ripening at every moment, all of our actions are ripening at every moment. And can we identify the kind of action that's needed right now in order to kind of repair past actions? Because it's possible. Your actions will continue to ripen There was a question about watering negative seeds, and it had been passed on to the children already. So, but now different seeds are watered, and how can that be? Don't worry about it. Those seeds right now that you have generated, the wonderful qualities, the wonderful seeds, they will continue to ripen. Even if not in your children, they will continue to ripen in many other forms of your continuation. Your children, in fact, are not your only continuation. Everything you've ever said continues into the world. So not just to look at this body and this ancestral lineage as us alone, that we're only this body or this ancestral lineage. We're also much, much more. And we have to train ourselves to recognize our continuation in our actions of thinking, speech, and when a loved one dies, when we've already practiced this on a daily basis, to recognize the continuation of our loved ones, the continuation of us in terms of karma, in terms of actions, and how it ripens. The moment that we die is just one moment. We continue, and we can already recognize that continuation right when we're alive. I remember Tay, there was one US tour, he was like, tell me how you want to continue me now. I don't wait until I die and then you have a gathering and you say, I want to continue Tay in this way and that way. So in that US tour, he had the whole Sangha gather and tell him exactly how we wanted to continue him in the world, and he wanted to hear that right now. But that was just one part, just our words telling him how we want to continue. But he'd already continued in many, many, many different forms, and he knew that. He was just kind of preparing us as well to learn how to recognize Tay in his many forms of continuation. So each one of us, can we recognize our many, many forms of continuation? Because a cloud never dies. It only continues, right? So I was asked to end a little bit early so that the organizers could show you a slideshow, I think. So I'll just end by recapping the 4 Plum Village Dharma seals. The first one, I have arrived, I am home. Is it all about dwelling happily in the present moment? That's half of it. When we accept the present moment, so the Plum Village practice is to be able to accept the present moment as our true home. And in the present moment, there's always both suffering and happiness. We need to identify the happiness to get the nourishment. You need the strength in order to take care of the suffering that's there. And we want to have enough strength so that we don't continue to run away from our suffering. When we don't have enough strength, we continue to run away. So get the nourishment you need and embrace the suffering that is there. So I have arrived, I am home is about accepting the present moment as our true home. The second one is go as a river. This sounds very, I don't know, go as a river. It's very poetic. But it's the biggest antidote to individualism, which has pretty much pervaded our century, the last century, etc. Go as a river is the biggest antidote to individualism. And go as a river is actually a living practice of no self. Yeah. 3 is the interbeing of the 3 times, the 2 truths, the 4 truths. The future is not there. The past is not there. When we look deeply into the present moment, we can identify our past. We can also identify our future. The 2 truths, 4 truths. Well, if you don't get that by now, when we look deeply into the historical moment, like Tay says, we can always touch the ultimate. They're not separate. The ultimate is not a place or a separate reality. It is the same. You just look deeply into the present moment and you can see the ultimate. You can see both the historical and the ultimate dimensions. The other day, when we scattered Tay's ashes, I had a spoonful in my hand also. And then I walked along the line of trees where the sisters normally do walking meditation through the poplar grove. And I scattered a little bit along each tree, at the foot of each tree. And as I was scattering the ashes, I felt, these are Tay's bones. I don't know if you felt it when you scattered his ashes. There were some fragments of bone, very small. And I'm scattering Tay's bones. And Tay will continue. His new manifestations he will have a multitude of new manifestations, including in each one of us that does walking down the poplar groves. He will accompany us. And as I was scattering, it wasn't just Tay's bones. I realized the path that we were walking on, I was walking on the bones of so many ancestors as well, not just Tay. The dinosaurs are all there. So touching deeply the historical, the present moment, we can touch deeply the ultimate. Yeah, nothing is lost. And then ripening at every moment is the 4th Dharma seal. In the first Dharma talk, when Sister Chung Duk said, she said, sometimes we have the impression that we know what the now is, what the here and now is. Now we have some tools, some ways of looking at the here and now. When we look at the present moment in terms of ripening, we understand it much differently. So thank you, everyone, for being here and listening to the talk this morning. I'll cede it to the organizers.
Thank you, Sister Lang Nghiem. Dear community, today is our last day of our retreat. And as the theme of the retreat was to see that we have a path of practice, that there is nothing to fear as long as we can come back and connect to the practice that is in us and in the community. To end our session this morning, the organizing team have prepared a gallery of the journey of 40 years of Plum Village. What we know today in this hall, which is very beautiful, it wasn't like this. It started very simple, just bricks, wood, cushions. But the beauty of Thai was he never waited for a proper meditation hall to be developed until we have a practice center. But he started as a grassroots community, working with whatever is present. And that is why one of our hall is called the Transformation Hall, which he transformed from a barn into a meditation. And the journey of Plum Village has begun 40 years ago, but also beyond 40 years ago. But we would like to just capture the images so that we can see the growth of the Sangha, the growth of the center that Thai chose to be the root temple of our Plum Village tradition. So I would like to invite all of us to go to a journey of the past, the present, and the future. please keep that picture. Dear Thai, dear Sangha, it's been a wonderful 2 weeks of practice together. It has offered the monastic Sangha a lot of nourishment, strength, hope as we move forward in this year. And as you see that our community has been doing its best to accompany and accommodate everyone. And we have always tried to keep all of our retreat as cheap as possible so that we can have many friends come and practice with us. Just within this year, there was an influx due to the situation of the world, the war, and we also have to learn to adapt to that. But there is wonderful friends all around the world who have been supporting us and keeping our center safe, as well as having enough resources to maintain Thai's wonderful legacy. And we are very grateful for all of the donations that have been coming in, especially in the last 2 years of the pandemic. I know we are still in the pandemic, but we have been reopening in order to not just nourish our physical monastery, but to nourish the soul, because we were also feeling very empty. And that's why we wanted to reopen and restart engaging with all of the retreats. And we have a wonderful foundation that has been taking care of the global monasteries that you have seen around the world that Thai has set up. It's called the Thich Nhat Hanh Foundation. And now we also have a branch in Europe. And I just like to hand the mic to our representative just to share how you can get involved with being a support for the whole legacy of Thai. Thank you.
Thank you, Brother Phaphu. Thank you, Thai. Thank you, dear Sangha. How cool was that? Wow, all these pictures from long time ago. It's really wonderful to stand here in front of you at the end of 2 weeks. And I know for many of you, it's not the first time that you've been here. So I would like you to raise your hand if you feel at home in Plum Village. I was kind of expecting a wave of hands. Thank you. There's some monastics enthusiastically waving in the back. Thank you. So just as you take care of your home in your own country, we would like you to ask you to help us take care of this home. This is not just the home of the monastics. It's your home. It's my home. It's the home, I hope, of future generations as well, because you have been benefiting from the practice these past 2 weeks, and we want to make sure that the children, the teenagers, the wake-ups who are coming in a few weeks will also be able to feel the nourishment of being together, of going as a river. So that's why I'm standing here. I'm here to ask for your support. We have a team of volunteers who are outside. They are all wearing these beautiful yellow t-shirts, just like me, and they speak many languages. They speak French, Spanish, German, Dutch, Swedish, and so on. And they would like to invite you to contribute to the future of Plum Village. And you might think, dear Lisbeth, I would like to, but I don't have so much. And that is okay. Because just like Sister Lang Nghiem said, we are a river and we can go as a river. And every little drop, every little gift that you can give will make a difference. So whether you give €5 or you become a monthly donor who gives €1 a day, that's all welcome. And as long as you give it from your heart, we will feel your support and your generosity and your kindness. So thank you, dear friends. For your support in the past, for your support in the future, and for continuing Thai's legacy with us.